geeks and geekettes and nerds worldwide. Yes, Ask Chuck Dixon has global reach. Welcome back to another segment where I answer questions about what I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I write comic books. So let's get right to the questions. Rising Star Comics. Though you have written the character of Daredevil before by proxy, such as through Punisher Comics or Marvel Knights, you've never actually written a main Daredevil title while you were at Marvel. Would you have been interested in writing a Daredevil series back in the 1990s while you were in Marvel's employ? And if so, what do you imagine a hypothetical Chuck Dixon Daredevil run would be like? Yeah, I was never in the mainstream at Marvel. I was never really in the superhero camp. I was always on the fringes. I think Moon Knight is the closest I got. And of course, my run on Marvel Knights, where I got to write an ensemble cast of superheroes, Marvel Universe superheroes. But generally in the 90s, when I was, doing the 80s and 90s, doing a lot of work at Marvel, I was never in that clique of the superhero guys. So, there was no chance I was ever going to write the Avengers or Fantastic Four or anything like that, because I wasn't part of that crowd. What would I do with Daredevil? Well, he's not a favorite character of mine, and hasn't been from the beginning. And I think there's problems with Daredevil that they've always tried to fix. And of course, there's been classic runs and great stories, and I loved reading the comic when I was a kid. It was one of the Marvel titles that I followed, religiously. But I think even Stan Lee realized early on there was a problem because, Matt Murdock's kind of a sad sack. Not because of the fact that he's blind, but he just seems to be, sort of a wet blanket in his own book, which is what I think caused Stan to introduce the swinging Mike Murdock persona, so that Stan could, live vicariously through yet another lounge lizard character. If you don't know about swinging Mike Murdock, you need to find out. It was one of the zanier concepts Stan put forth in the 60s. But yeah, I don't have a lot of interest in it. And if you'll notice, when I write Daredevil with other characters, he generally gets short shrift. He comes up short against Frank Castle because Daredevil's a character that I wish he would wise up. He seems to, his life is miserable and he seems to wallow in it for the most part. And you have to admit, even in classic runs, even in what are considered iconic runs of Daredevil, he's not a fun guy. And I just, you think for a character who's a lawyer as well as a superhero, he would develop some level of cynicism, but he never does. So, which might be an admirable quality, that he maintains his faith in human nature and his faith in humanity. But after all the crap he's been through, it makes him out to be kind of a dope. Old Graybeard. I've been getting really interested in reading Conan novels and comics. From what I understand, even today, the stories do not fall into any type of political narrative mandated by their publisher, and that sounds rather appealing. Given your history with the material, what was it like writing for Savage Sword of Conan compared to others? Were there constraints, or did you have more freedom to tell a story? And last but not least, who was your favorite character to write for? Well, yeah, politics generally don't enter into Conan, because if they did, they would instantly ruin it. But, that doesn't mean Marvel, in their recent Conan iteration, couldn't resist tampering. There was famously some art changes made because, someone got offended for some reason about the costuming on a certain character. And this is the result. These are the art changes demanded. I don't know why Marvel lost the Conan license, why the Conan estate withdrew the comic book license to Marvel. Did it just time out or whatever? But if the Howard estate purposely took the license away from Marvel, it has to be for reasons like this, that they were going to tamper with the character, because Conan is a pure character. What was it like working on Savage Sword of Conan? It was awesome. It was awesome. It was my first really big time regular gig. It was 50 pages a month, guaranteed, because Larry Hama told me that I would be the regular Savage Sword writer. And so 50 pages a month guaranteed was a living. It allowed me to quit my day job as a security guard at an insurance company, and it allowed me to propose to my fiance, my wife of now 35 years, because I could afford to support her, doing this silly thing I do for a living, writing comics. Didn't know if it was going to last, but I thought I got at least a year of steady employment plus other stuff I was picking up, and maybe this might just work out. So I got to work with Gary Quapis, became a lifelong friend and my most frequent collaborator. I got to work with some other terrific artists, and it was just a whole lot of fun. And I was mostly left alone. There were very few constraints because it was a Marvel magazine. It wasn't under the comics code, so we were free to go a little crazy on the material and do some wild stuff. And also, as I was beginning my run on Conan, Larry Hama informed me that the Lovecraft monsters, the Lovecraft mythos had fallen into public domain, and so we could fold that into Conan, which just made perfect sense, since Conan was published originally in the 1930s in Weird Tales magazine, where Lovecraft's work first appeared. Now, as far as constraints, there's two funny stories I got to tell you. Like I said, it wasn't a comics code book. Early on in Savage Sword's run, there was actual, nudity, full frontal nudity for females, but that sort of went by the boards after a while. But I remember Larry called me once, and he said, "Look, in Conan, I want savagery. I want bestial, brutal, horrible violence. I want eyes gouged out, and teeth knocked out, and limbs severed, and everything else." He said, I really want to get into the barbaric nature of this book and just go full out, primordial violence. And I thought, okay, cool, I can do that. I probably would have done that anyway, but yeah, I'm good for that. And then he says, oh, and by the way, you got to stop using hell and damn. So even though it wasn't a code book, Marvel didn't like us to use the words hell and damn as imprecations in the books. So I was like, okay, seems a little contradictory, but okay. In another instance, Tom DeFalco, he was talking to Larry and I, and he said Tom was editor-in-chief of Marvel at the time, and he was editor-in-chief for most of the time I was at Marvel. When Tom left, I was pretty much out the door with him. And Tom was a great guy to work for. I wish there were more people like Larry and Tom running comics today, because they were, great creative guys, but they were also businessmen and realists, and wanted to create quality work that readers would respond to and actually buy, so we could actually make some money and justify our paychecks. But anyway, I was in conversation with Larry and Tom said that he was uncomfortable with some of the sex scenes that I was writing in Savage Sword of Conan. The Cimmerians' romantic dalliances with the ladies. And he says he was uncomfortable. Some of them made him uncomfortable and thought that I was sort of, pushing the envelope a little bit on those scenes. And I said, well, I'm not any more graphic, in fact, quite a bit less graphic than scenes like that had been in earlier issues of Savage Sword. And I said, I don't want to write porno. So, but I don't understand what's the difference between the way I do it and the way it's been done in earlier issues. And Tom says, I think my problem is that they look like they're enjoying it too much. So Tom was having a problem with happy sex as opposed to the more brutal, cold, matter of fact, love 'em and leave 'em sex that Conan was having. And I did. I wrote scenes where Conan expressed obvious, real affection for the women that he was getting it on with. But Tom felt that maybe I was veering too close to reality. But anyway, loved working for those guys, Larry and Tom. Just it was an awesome time. Now, as far as Conan, I have written a Conan novel, which will be released soon, and I am almost completed. In fact, I'm going to complete it this week, a second Conan novel. So you got two of them coming at you. So I'm back on the material, and because I love this character. And who is my favorite character to write in this franchise? It's Conan. He's just a terrific, nuanced. He's not a mindless brute like some people write him. Nuanced, intelligent, tough guy, and I dig it. And he's a slob hero. And if you watch these videos, you know how much I love slob heroes. Joseph asks, "Hey Chuck, if I were to buy an omnibus of your old work, how much of the money would end up in your pocket? For example, if I bought the upcoming Mark Spector Moon Knight omnibus, would you get a good portion of that, or would it all end up in Marvel's pocket?" Yeah. There's an Epic collection that I think the first 7 issues of Mark Spector Moon Knight are in it, and then there's an omnibus on its way that has my entire run. Well, the entire run of Mark Spector Moon Knight, including my 24 issues, the first 2 years of the book, and maybe they include what was that, Marvel Presents or something like that. I did a 2-parter in that anthology book they had. So yeah, there's an omnibus on the way. Now, how much money do I get? Yeah, I don't get the lion's share. That's for damn sure. And Marvel is Marvel. Well, the weird thing about Marvel is they're not like other companies where if they send you some sort of a bonus, they call it a royalty. At Marvel, it's called an incentive, and an incentive by law is a gift, and so they don't have to give it to you. They can literally cut you off on royalty payments because they're not royalties, they're a gift. Under Marvel's contract, even the return of original artwork is considered a gift, which means that they could stop returning original artwork if they just didn't feel very giving at that time. So the difference between what Marvel, let's say a check from Marvel and a check from DC on roughly the same material, digital or whatever, it's huge. I mean, DC checks are still pretty decent, and Marvel checks are still pretty poor. I mean, I've gotten routinely, talking out of school, routinely a DC check is 4 or 5 figures for royalties. I've gotten checks from Marvel. Now remember, I did an awful lot of work at DC, but so it's quantity, but it's also the royalty rate, because I did a lot of work at Marvel too, and a Marvel check, literally, I can get Marvel checks where, I could take the family to Red Lobster as long as we didn't order any appetizers, sides, or dessert. We're talking about 2-figure checks. Checks so small, sometimes I forget to cash them. I magnet them to the refrigerator and forget about them, and they time out. Which the only thing that pleases me about that is, Marvel's accounting is thrown off by $39.85 because I didn't cash that check. So yeah, but off a thing like an omnibus, I would see probably a 4-figure check off of that. So don't let that determine whether you buy it or not. If you want it, get it. But just to let you know, DC takes care of its freelancers, quite a bit better actually than Marvel. I'm not even going to try on that name, sir or ma'am, or otherwise. I often wonder, do you think you would have stayed at DC had Dennis O'Neil not fired you before No Man's Land? I know you came back to write Batgirl's Origin and Richard Dragon later on, but would you have stayed at DC with the new crew? I think your chronology is off here because I did a lot of stuff at Denny didn't fire me entirely. Um, Denny wanted to fire the three writers who were currently writing at that time the three core Batman titles: Batman, Detective Comics, and Shadow of the Bat. And so he wanted to clean house and start over with new writers. So he fired Doug, Mensch, Alan Grant, and myself all on the same day from those titles. Now, at the time, I think Alan was still writing Lobo, but I don't think Doug had another series at DC. So Doug was fired entirely. And Denny admitted to me later that he would have liked to have kept me on Detective, but it didn't seem fair. And if you know Denny, that's so Denny. He threw the baby out with the bathwater. A few months later, he offered me Batman. This is a deep inside story. He offered me the Batman title, and I turned it down because he said you're under consideration with another writer. And I said, well, who's the other writer? And he said, Larry Hama. And I said, man, I can't. If I accept this, I'm taking a job from Larry. I can't do it. I can't do it because Larry had given me my big break at Marvel, as I told you. Gave me Savage Sword of Conan, allowed me to get married, allowed me to quit my day job, and I couldn't do it. And then he said, okay, yeah, okay, I understand. And we got off the phone. 5 minutes later, Scott Peterson calls me, Denny's associate editor, and says, why did you turn it down? Why did you turn it down? And I said, well, I explained the whole thing. And he goes, but the artist is going to be Scott McDaniel. And I said, well, Denny didn't mention that. If Denny had mentioned that, I probably would have taken the job, despite my reservations about taking a job away from Larry. And in the end, it would have been a good thing because obviously Scott McDaniel and I collaborated well. We worked all that time on Nightwing, and it would have been a good thing. And in the end, Larry and Scott McDaniel did not collaborate well. They didn't get along. They didn't gel on the title, and it was a very short run. I think if I had taken it, we would have been on it for a couple of years. Everything would have worked out. But for some reason, these collaborations, they're like a marriage. It just didn't work out. And I had both Larry and Scott McDaniel complaining to me about each other. So yeah, I wasn't fired. I still had regular titles. Also, post Denny firing me from Detective, I went on to work with the new guys. Along with Scott Beatty. There's a lot of Scotts in my life, you may have noticed. Along with Scott Beatty, we did the company-wide crossover Last Laugh. And as you mentioned, I did Batgirl Year One. And, but I stayed on Nightwing for quite a while. Nightwing comics by me were appearing all the way into 2002. Even after I got the cross-gen, I gave 6 months notice at DC. And so I continued writing on the three titles that I was associated with. I continued writing Robin until issue 100 and Birds of Prey. And for a short while, I'd left Green Arrow at some point, but I did 3 years on Green Arrow. So I was still doing 3 to 4 titles a month at DC, even after, quote unquote, Denny fired me. So that's the chronology there. And I also did some work on No Man's Land. So I was brought in, I was kind of snuck in on the early conferences for No Man's Land that Bob Gale and Larry Hama were present for. I did a couple of arcs and a couple of specials. And of course, I was still doing my monthly Robin and Nightwing and Birds of Prey, and they would occasionally relate to No Man's Land. So yeah, I was fired from Detective, but I continued to work at DC. Just setting the record straight for you with the unpronounceable name. Ace Movic. I'm curious, When you mentioned publishing stories through crowdfunding, I couldn't help but wonder why not publish through Image Comics. Have they been blacklisting comic veterans that aren't founders? Well, I don't know if I'm blacklisted at Image. I haven't really looked into it, but my problem with Image is my problem with Image Comics is I don't like the creator-owned contract. I don't think it's fair. I think it more favors Image than it does the creator, and I don't trust their accounting. And the only time I did a creator-owned project at Image, Iron Ghost, which wasn't published by Image by me, it was published by the packager through Image. The only time I did a creator-owned thing with them, they got the indicia wrong. They got the copyright wrong. So, and didn't seem all that concerned when I pointed this out to them. It was very important to me that the copyright be correct, and they didn't seem to give a rip. And, yeah, so it's not a company I've ever been very much endeared to. Standard creator-owned contract makes the creator or creative team partners with the publisher, and everything's split down the middle. And every Image contract I've ever read, kind of front loads all the royalties to Image. And my thing is, if they can't get something as simple as an indicia right, I can't really rely on them to get the royalty payments right, the distribution of funds right. And it's not a question of honesty or anything else. To me, it's a question of competence. So if you can't get the little things right, you're not going to get the big things right either. So I kind of stay away. Crowdfunding, different thing. It's a different kind of accounting. It's a different setup. And quite frankly, it's far more lucrative than going through a company like Image and waiting and hoping that they dole out the royalties fairly and timely. So, Christopher R. Taylor. Why did so many indie publishers go under when they had such good, praised, and popular content? Kamiko, First, Eclipse, etc. There were so many good titles, and then suddenly they were all gone. Yeah, you're right. In the 80s particularly, there was this explosion of independent publishers, crowd in the stands. And the stuff was being eaten up. I mean, the buyers were there, the customers were there, and each new company seemed to be greeted with a fanfare by the fans, and the material gobbled up. Now, companies go under for a variety of reasons. I'm not sure why Kamiko went under. Now, I had an early on relationship with Kamiko when they first opened their doors. I was one of the first independent creators to come in. Their titles originally at Kamiko were created by the founders of the company. You had, 4 young guys cranking out their own comics, learning the business as they went along, and they were, funded by a family member, and they began getting licensed stuff, drawing in other outside creators and everything else, and had quite a degree of success doing that. But knowing these guys, I think probably mismanagement combined with disinterest, and I believe they brought in some outside advisors and outside investors, and that's usually the death knell. It's the difference between a Krispy Kreme donut before they went public and a Krispy Kreme donut after they went public, if you know what I mean. You bring in the parties who are strictly there for business and kind of leaving that creative spark behind, because these guys were comic fans, living the dream, and then it turned into, not so much fun business. I just think it just sort of faded away to obscurity, by attrition. Now, First Comics was different. First Comics came out of the gate fully funded with a line of comics by established comic book pros. And the thing about First was they weren't doing all superhero stuff. They were doing science fiction, adventure, crime, and they were going gangbusters there for a while. Doing some big titles. Grumjack was one of their big ones. American Flag, John Sable, E-Man, things like that. And they were selling well, but I think there was a little bit of dirty work at the crossroads money-wise, and they began to hemorrhage cash, and payments got slower and slower and slower, and freelancers were loath to work with them. One of the most amazing things that they would do is they would skip a payment. So you would get your check for issue 10, and then a few months later, get your check for issue 12, and and you call them, hey, what happened to issue 11? Oh, and they pretend it was a big mistake that you had been paid. Well, okay, I can see that happening once or twice, but it seemed to happen every other issue, and I'm not the only freelancer it happened to. And I think they were kind of hoping, hey, these dopey comic book people, they won't notice that we skipped the payment. But I always did. So, and then one first editor famously would say when asked for payment, he would say the check is in the envelope, not in the mail, it's in the envelope. Again, hoping that dopey comic book people wouldn't understand that it was not on the way. So this is the first time I ran into cash flow, the phrase cash flow, which after working for First, every time I would hear cash flow, it was tools down. You didn't work for that company anymore. As soon as you heard cash flow, because I've never seen a comic book company come back from cash flow problems. Once they start having them, it's like cancer. It spreads through the company, and the company dies. So I did work for First, and a number of other people did, and First ended up bringing on investors to stop the hemorrhaging, which of course that doesn't work because the people running the company just took the investing money and spent that like water too. So they were constantly searching for more and more money, and eventually they sold, little bits and pieces of the company to like an army of lawyers, and they went bankrupt, and the rights were thrown into confusion. So the first is probably the ugliest death of a comic company I've ever seen, because everybody was screwed. Every creator got screwed, and you had to, if you were going to get your rights back, you had to get entangled in all of that legal nonsense, and some people did, and won out, and others just said, screw it, and went on. So, which is why you don't see a lot of First material. They created a lot of inventory, but you don't see much of it in print, in collections and such like that. Now, Eclipse was a different story. Eclipse was a very, very vibrant company. It published anything that would make money, any comic, which is how a comic book company should be run. Redundant publishing. If this made money, let's do 6 more. And Dean Mullaney, marketing genius, the greatest guerrilla marketer in comics I've ever met in my life. And he ran the company with Cat Ironwood as editor-in-chief, and then Dean's brother Jan handled finances and things like that. And I never heard the word cash flow from these people. I never heard that word, because they always paid on time, and they created, the creator-owned contract. And, that largely, that was Dean Mullaney. And it's the creator-owned contract that Epic used, and so many other people use, and I use as a model. When anybody wants to go in partnership with me on a comics project as a publisher, I send them my own, like, basically rewritten version of the Eclipse creator-owned contract, because it's fair. It's fair to the publisher, it's fair to the creator, and it delineates everything perfectly. And I owe it to Dean that contract helped me protect all of the creator-owned material that I worked on at Eclipse. And now, why Eclipse went out of business? There's a number of reasons. There was a terrible flood of their offices. I mean, actual water type, river coming over its banks and flooded the offices, which was quite a setback for the company because a lot of work in progress was destroyed. Galleys for books they were going to publish were destroyed. And I think this, in conjunction with Kat and Dean, who were married at the time, going for a divorce, I think that kind of sped up the flood, and the divorce kind of sped up the creation, or the sped up the demise of the company. I mean, I'm not gossiping because I don't know anything. I just assume that that's what happened because everything else seemed to happen at once. And Eclipse was slowly publishing less and less stuff and not looking at submissions and just sort of, easing toward the exits. And then finally the company was dissolved. So like I said, there's, 3 different reasons why an independent company went under, and there's many, many more reasons why an independent comic book company can fail. The famous saying is, if you want to make $1 million in comics, start with $2 million. But of the 3 that I talked about, Eclipse was the smartest run, the wisest run, and it's still the creation of Eclipse still to this day benefits the people that work there and did work for them, and was a force for good in the comic industry. Not bad for a pair of communists. So, hey, what's you reading? People like this segment. Apparently, I'm costing people money because I'm recommending things and they want to run out and buy them. So, but it's cool that, I'm suggesting things that you might like. Currently, I'm reading an Alexander Kent novel. It's the 11th in the Bolitho series. It's about Richard Bolitho, who is the novels begin with him as a midshipman during the Napoleonic era in the British Navy. And this one is about Bolitho facing down a mutiny and going to sea as a flag captain. And the flag captain is the captain of the ship that the admiral happens to be on, and all the tensions and everything else. Kent is actually Douglas Reman, very, very prolific author who writes about all things nautical in British history. He writes awesome World War II nautical thrillers, a series about the Royal Marines. It goes through the Victorian period all the way up to World War I. He's probably most famous for these novels written as Alexander Kent about Richard Bolitho. And this one, as always, it's awesome. After reading 10 books before this with this character and the subsidiary characters around him, you have a real affection and a real connection, and you can really relate. And obviously, Riemann was a naval guy himself, so all of the research and terminology and everything else are impeccable, but clear enough so a landlubber like me can understand what the hell's going on. But this is just good action stuff with a lot of heart. Gets extraordinarily violent, but also deals with political intrigue inside the Royal Navy and all the rest of it. If you dig this kind of thing, if you dig, a ripping yarn, a good historical adventure, you really can't do better than these books. Okay, on the recommendation of a review in Wall Street Journal, I got this book, The End of the World is Just Beginning, by Peter Zeihan, and the review was misleading. I got the book, and I got about 100 pages into it, and it just kept making me madder and madder and madder. And basically, what this guy is talking about is that globalization, the movement toward globalization, is due to collapse under its own weight, which is okay. But I wanted more details, and I don't know. The guy's, he starts out talking about the agriculture, the history of agriculture, and basically, the invention of agriculture and how it leads to globalization, how it leads to trade between nations and things like that. And originally the industry of agriculture determine where our cities would be placed and all these kind of things. But I took issue with a lot of his ideas he put forth about the history of agriculture. I felt they were inaccurate. I felt that he didn't really understand. And then that led into other problems I have with the book. But my biggest problem with the book was his writing is too cute. He's too impressed with himself, and he makes jokes that really aren't funny and keeps making them. So he's like that. Reading this book was like that party guest that you can't get away from, that you pray to God somebody's going to walk up and interrupt the conversation so you can walk away. So yeah, I don't recommend this one. And it was, yeah, and I'm not going to trust Wall Street Journal reviews anymore. This book I will recommend highly. It's from Cinebooks. It's a French graphic novel translated into English for the first time. It's Berazina, and it's a graphic novel adaptation of Patrick Rimbaud's novel, Berazina. Earlier, this same team did an excellent adaptation of Patrick Rimbaud's The Battle, which I believe was about Austerlitz, the Battle of Austerlitz. So it's Napoleonic era, and this is 3 graphic novels that combine to tell the story of the Napoleon's entry into Russia in 1812 and the disaster. And this particular volume deals very clearly and in an exciting way, and in a way that really brings history to life. And that's what I love about graphic novels like this. They bring the era to life in a way that even a movie can't. And it details the story of how when Napoleon's army, the French army, showed up in Moscow, ready to lay siege to the city, they found it abandoned. The Tsar had removed his family and every Russian citizen from Moscow. And so it's a ghost town. The only people left are foreign nationals. So there's a lot of French and German people left in Moscow. They weren't allowed to leave. And so the French settle in. Hey, this was easy. We took over the capital of Russia. We're just going to settle in, winter here as a base camp, and then spread out. We're going to pursue the Tsar's family, and we're going to spread out over Russia and make Russia a part of the French Empire, the Napoleonic Empire. Problem with that was that the Tsar and his family leaving was only the beginning of the Tsar's strategy. He left behind saboteurs in every house, in every store, in every public building and palace in Moscow had a saboteur hiding in it, hiding in the attic, hiding in the wine cellar, hiding in a cabinet. And their mission was to wait a few days and then set fire to every single building. And so within a few days, Moscow had burned to the ground. It was uninhabitable. And so the French had to winter in Russia with no shelter, which of course led to their retreat, because in addition to being no shelter, there was no food because it had all burned in the fire. And this led to the disastrous retreat from Moscow, which eventually led to Napoleon's first exile as the French army collapsed. And this book is just, covers that part of the story, and obviously there'll be more, miserable scenes of the French freezing as they try to get back home. But it's excellent. I can't recommend it highly enough, and I'm looking forward to the next volume. Hey, if you want to contact me directly, BrunoBookstore@gmail.com. BrunoBookstore@gmail.com is the most direct line to me. I check it all the time, and I'm going to be quite frank with you. The basket full of questions is empty. I have no more questions. You must ask me more questions. So send more questions to BrunoBookstore@gmail.com. And of course, you're perfectly welcome to leave questions in the comments under this video or send me questions on Facebook. But I got to warn you, sometimes I miss them. And the way that you can send your questions that I will never miss is to send them directly to BrunoBookstore@gmail.com. Hey, let me tell you about Subscribestar. Subscribestar, Chuck Dixon, is where you can join up and help support me in my various comic projects, help support these videos, because I'd like to keep making these every week, but I've got to justify the time, my friends. I am a professional. I do this for a living. And you can go to Subscribestar and help make that happen. There's a $5 tier and a $1 tier. And in addition to that, on the Subscribestar website, I share with you stuff that other people are not going to get to see. There's comics there you can read. There's announcements. There's sneak peeks. There's previews that I put nowhere else but on Subscribestar. So going to Subscribestar makes you a real Dixonverse insider. You will be the first to know about everything. In addition to that, I send out digital goodies every month. You'll get digital copies of scripts, artwork, a lot of times largely unpublished stuff, stuff that was never published for whatever reason. And this month is a Halloween double feature with a script for an issue of Nightmare on Elm Street and another horror comic, and now I'm drawing a blank. But they went out. Everybody got them. And when you first subscribe on the $5 tier, you actually get a physical media. You'll get a package with some randomly chosen and signed comic books by me, an exclusive postcard, and any other goodies I got lying around I can shove in an envelope and send your way. So there are benefits beyond just being the first to hear about stuff. And one of the newest benefits for $5 subscribers is a Chuck miniature figure, a Chuck Dixon miniature figure for wargaming or whatever. It's exclusive, it's unique, it's custom made for the site, and it can be yours as a $5 subscriber. And if you've already subscribed to the $5 level, don't worry, you're going to be getting this too. It's just my way of saying thanks for joining up, and join up, $5, and send me into battle. You can have Chuck Dixon killing zombies or space pirates or whatever the heck it is you play. Have me killing hobbits. Why not? So anyway, that would be a big help to me, and I will put the link below this very video. And that's it for me this week. I thank you for watching, listening, liking, subscribing. Super thanks. Everything you do. Thank you for the questions. Like I said, I'm out of questions. So unless you just want to hear me blather on about stuff, that I have to choose, you don't want that. Send me some more questions, and I'll see you all down the road.